Welcome to Building a Sustainable Supply Chain by Project 44 and Westernacher. I'm Paul Sladovnik, and I'm a solution architect and the pre-sales lead for transportation and logistics here in North America for Westernacher. A little bit about Westernacher is it is a niche consulting firm focused in the supply chain area as well as in SAP consulting for a little over 50 years. And since this is a sustainability topic, we're proud to report that we've been carbon neutral since 2021. With me today is Christian from Project 44, and I'll turn it over to him for a quick introduction.
Yeah, hey, Paul, thanks for having me. Christian Cpiller, Vice President of Research and Sustainability at Project 44. For those of you that may be unaware, Project 44, number one, is a partner with Westernacher, so we're happy to be here. Project 44 is a real-time visibility platform. We have over 1,000 global customers that we're providing the highest fidelity performance data to so they can more effectively run their supply chains.
And that's perfect because my first question was, we are obviously a partner with Project 44 with some time to value solutions in the area of visibility. So as we were putting together some of our sustainability topics for 2022, I was happy to see P44's name pop up for some sustainability focused solutions as well. And I understand that you've done a lot of research and investment in that area. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your product. But for our viewers and listeners, could you maybe talk through what some of the different scopes of emissions are? Because I think that's where it really starts.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that may be unfamiliar with emissions, there's three scopes: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 is really all the buildings and vehicles that a company owns. So if you're a global coffee company that has coffee stores, your Scope 1 emissions will be your stores themselves, your distribution centers, and your roasting facilities. Scope 2 emissions are really electricity and other purchased utilities to run your business. So that includes the power used in your server farms, as an example. Scope 3 is everything else. So that includes supply chain, freight transport, purchase goods, business travel, and waste. So typically what we see from customers, and this is something that's validated by consultants and others that track the industry, is that roughly 10% of a company's global emissions are Scope 1 and 2. And the other 90% are Scope 3. Now, this can be very different if you're an aluminum maker, a steel maker, an automobile maker, a cement maker, something along those lines. But in general, this holds very, very true for shippers, retailers, consumer packaged goods, and the like. On the right-hand side, clicks into that Scope 3 a little bit more. So up to 70% of that 90% on the left-hand side is in supply chain. So 70% times 90% is 60%. Project 44's solution is really focused on at 60%. We're trying to solve the Scope 3 emissions data problem, very similar to we solved the global visibility problem. And that's why it's super important to clarify what is Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 and how it's important for customers of Project 44, Westernacher, and anyone else that's interested.
Awesome. Thanks for talking through that. Now, just to get into your solution a little bit, we have an example of one of your dashboards pulled up here. And true to what you ended on, it does seem to all start with data. And I think that's another reason that P44 and Westernacher are such good partners. It ties in well with our implementation approach, which is a minimum viable product, otherwise known as crawl, then walk, and then run. And with crawl, you always start with the data so that you can understand some of the drivers and what the impact is.
Right. So one of the biggest challenges for shippers, and it's something I've heard repeatedly, whether it be at industry conferences, from other executives, from the 60 plus customers that I've gone really deep in having a conversation on their sustainability goals and roadmaps and journeys and challenges, is data. There's no single source of global Scope 3 emissions across all modes, across all regions. Getting to that high fidelity Scope 3 supply chain data, it's inaccessible, it's inaccurate, so it's very, very difficult. Project 44 is looking to solve that. So very similar to how Project 44 became the largest platform and the world's leading real-time visibility provider, we'll follow a very similar journey for sustainability, where we'll start off with the most important modes globally. We'll build into more modes globally. We'll build into more regions, and then we'll have a platform that has end-to-end visibility and end-to-end emissions data so that customers can really understand what's going on in the network, but not only measure their carbon footprint, have analytics, insights, and workflows to fundamentally reduce their emissions. And there's a few different ways that can be done. I think we'll talk about it in a little bit more. But on the right-hand side is an example of our dashboard. Highly accurate, high fidelity data, very similar to our visibility data, but it talks about total carbon footprint, intensity factors. You can see some trending up on the right-hand side. All of this information is clickable. So on the bottom left-hand side, emissions by trade lane, you can see total footprint as well as intensity and how that's trending. You can click into that and see what's happening within the lane by carrier, by region. On the right-hand side is another view, which is emissions by carrier. So if you work with one of the largest ocean liners in the world, you can go and click inside and see what's happening. Now, we include total footprint as well as intensity, because if you have the majority of your volume with one single carrier, obviously they're going to have a larger footprint. So that's why intensity is important, where it normalizes for volume, shipment distance, weight, etc. So you can understand, are all the small decisions I'm making upstream having an impact on my emissions? So you can see the trend in intensity and how all the small decisions you've made have turned into a really big impact on your global carbon footprint.
And one of the ways that this can work into the transportation management solution as well, I see is called out at the bottom there with how to bring this into workflow. And if you can manage to work emissions-based tendering into how carriers are being selected, similar to maybe a Google Flights, where as you're looking for, we'll say New York to LA, you see if you go with airline A, it's minus 10% emissions, or airline B, which is plus 20% emissions. You could do something similar with your carriers, which initially it might not be something that is easy to adapt to, but over time and as your database grows and your true understanding of the footprint grows, you can start to do that as a more subtle choice to understand, if I go with carrier A, then I can start to meet the goals that my company has set for reducing their overall carbon footprint. And I think something else, something else that we had talked on a couple of days ago as well, Christian, was around a MACC topic, which kind of goes back to that crawl, walk, run approach I had mentioned with starting with your data and understanding what some of the drivers can be and what the impact of that is. And you had provided a really good example around, maybe it isn't a full jump into sustainability right away. Maybe it's focusing on a single mode of transport. I think the example had been around ocean. Could you maybe talk some of the listeners through what exactly is the MACC topic and how that could be applied to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take the first part of your question first, and we'll get back to MACC, or the marginal abatement cost curve. So for the longest time, supply chains have really only had two ways to optimize: cost and performance. What's the cheapest way to get from A to B, or what's the fastest way to get from A to B? And there's been no third direction to optimize, being emissions. As I said earlier, Project 44 is building that Scope 3 emissions data set. So for the first time, shippers can understand cost versus performance versus emissions. And if they choose to do least emissions routing, like you kind of talked about in that airline example, but this would be for global ocean, they can understand the trade-off in cost and performance. And if you're a global shipper that has inbound ocean, and then you have middle mile truckload and final mile courier services in metropolitan areas throughout the world, so it's a fairly simple supply chain with just three modes, you might not be able to make the cost versus performance versus emissions trade-off in final mile, because you have customer experience that you've made a commitment to your customers and you have to get it there. But you can understand further upstream, maybe if I select a different carrier or a different sailing schedule, or source the same material from another region, I understand the trade-off in cost and performance, I understand the impact it has on emissions, and I can start to measure and reduce my emissions in global ocean. Now, transitioning to what you said about MACC, or the marginal abatement cost curve, it's a really interesting tool or data process for companies to understand their sustainability strategy. No one company's supply chain is the same. Every company has their own intricacies within their supply chain, their own prioritizations, their own challenges. So if a company is thinking about how do I start my sustainability journey, one is Scope 3 emissions data is going to be extremely helpful. But if you get into the marginal abatement cost curve, you can look into all of the different things. Is it better pallet build efficiency? Is it better truckload utilization, which is something that Westernacher can absolutely help with? Is it more sustainable packaging? Is it better routes? Is it least emissions routing for global ocean? Is it electrifying my fleet? Whatever it might be, you can build MACC so you can understand the reduction in carbon, but also the level of effort or cost to get you there. So you can prioritize your sustainability strategy, and you can have a very clear roadmap on what you do, when, where, and how to get you to that net neutral target you might have in 2040 or 2050.
Some really good insights there. And something I heard too was, as it might not apply to last mile initially, it seems like this still can act as an enabler for not just the supply chain portion of it, but also, like you mentioned, with user experience. I think that's something we're seeing with companies such as Amazon, where if you're a Prime member, you might get same day or next day or 2-day shipping, but you do see them offer you an incentive as the customer to take everything on a Prime day, such as Friday, or having one single weekly delivery day to prevent the additional fuel spend and additional emissions. So it does start to seep into other areas of companies as well, such as, again, that customer experience portion.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things is, like, you and I are both end consumers, as we all are listening to this call. So it's really important to understand that some of the decisions we make as end consumers in having that same day or next day delivery, we've become attuned to it because of convenience, but is it really necessary for you to get, I just ordered a box of liquid IV. I didn't need it same day, so I waited until that Amazon Prime Day, and I took that $1.50 digital credit. One of the challenges that shippers are going to have is training their customers to make those decisions. And one of the ways you do that is with better data. And understandably so, customers may say, well, I'm so attuned to getting the same day, I absolutely need this. Shippers can still provide that service, but the shipper will understand cost versus performance versus emissions, and they can also start to surface that data back to their customers, so the customers can say, oh, wow, I didn't realize that my buying decisions have such an impact on the environment, and I'm someone that cares about sustainability in my personal life, so why not start making these reasonable decisions as an end consumer? When I leave the office, I'm also doing something sustainable when I go home.
Yeah, I know my purchasing habits might change if I started seeing my carbon footprint or carbon emission. So with each individual purchase I made, that's for sure. Coming into the TM side and kind of how you can use a transportation management solution to help with your carbon footprint as well. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, such as digitalizing some of your transactions and processes, such as settlement. So instead of expecting a paper invoice submitted from each of your carriers and going back and forth for dispute monitoring and accounting documents, that can all be digitalized. That way it's quick to archive, quick to find, and that's pretty low-hanging fruit and very common with a lot of the companies we implement with. Moving beyond that, and once you have, again, that good level of data for the crawl approach, as you turn into walk and run, you can start to do more with your supply chain, such as minimizing empty space on pallets. And once you have very efficient pallets that are built based on your material master data, how you want to consolidate across customers, you can start to maximize your truck space by understanding what is the actual dimensions of my resource, how can I load it in the most efficient manner, how can I consolidate different customer orders within a set distance or within a zone. And then consolidating across multiple days as well, in case you have customers that are fine receiving it a day or two early or a day or two late. Again, once these customers are trained and the user experience has been, expectations have been shifted a little bit. And part of that, the end goal is also just to do more with the same. So instead of using 10 trucks for your volume, today, you could maybe use 10 trucks for 1.5 times your volume just by maximizing the space used on those trucks, utilizing them for backhauls on the way back, and understanding what the true carbon output from those vehicles is. And then just an overall picture of what we've talked about today. I think we covered some of the direct savings, which could be something such as fuel or reduced vehicles required in terms of capital. Some indirect savings, such as the reduction of your scope 3 emissions and increasing your supply chain accountability. Brand equity, which is a really big one, especially with consumers who are becoming more savvy and in terms of what the companies they are spending money on support, as well as increased sense of social responsibility. So again, we're seeing it even as we book flights today with what are the overall emissions on your flight. And then lastly, carbon trading, which is a topic we haven't really got into yet, but I know P44 has recently done some projects over in Europe with your sustainability software. So could you maybe talk about how you're seeing that play into the carbon trading market, which is almost $200 billion today and continuing to grow?
Yeah, I think the most interesting impact of the carbon trading market is, like, what is the true cost of a metric ton of carbon? How is that determined? And then how is that factored into emerging regulations in terms of taxes, right? So what's the cost of a metric ton of emissions? How is it calculated? And really what that means. So getting back to that cost versus performance versus emissions conversation, if now customers have to contemplate carbon taxes into their decisions, that might mean, well, for the longest time I used supplier A in region X because it was the least cost. But now that I factor in the cost of a metric ton of carbon and how much metric tons of carbons are emitted by an ocean container that I'm shipping from A to B, well, I might choose supplier B in region Y now, factoring in that cost. So there's going to be a situation where shippers have to, one, start paying taxes on their emissions, particularly in Europe. That's starting in 2023 and 2024. But also, what does that mean for strategic network design? So for a while, you can mitigate through making carrier selection decisions on a lane you've already operated on. But what about when you need to open a new fulfillment center, or you need to find a new supplier, or you're expanding into a new country? Shippers will make very, very different decisions if they have to factor in and optimize for another cost, being carbon emissions. So that's something that we see particularly emerging in Europe. We have several ocean customers that are using our technology to set a foundation for what is their total global carbon footprint by carrier, by lane, and helping them understand where there are opportunities to reduce. On their side, that's helping them create their ESG reports. It's helping them think about how they can meet emerging regulation, particularly in Europe. And we also have some other customers that are taking fuel consumption data on truck and using that internally to make better routing decisions and prioritizing the investment of the electrification of their fleet. So there's many different ways it can be used, but I think just for the casual observer, it's clear where the global market's going, whether it be the IMO or Europe, the EU carbon border tax. You will start to be charged for your carbon emissions in scope 3. And if you didn't understand scope 3, or you don't have an accurate data set of scope 3, and you didn't know about the carbon emissions, it's really time to start thinking through how you can do that, whether it be the examples you just provided for the great things Westernacher can do, digitalization, opportunities to reduce fuel, increasing efficiency. But on the bottom right-hand side, that's where we're going. You're going to start being charged for your carbon emissions.
So that indirect savings around scope 3 emission reduction could quickly turn into direct savings as regulations ramp up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be a tax mitigation strategy. It could be, a tax saving strategy. And a lot of companies are going to have to change the way they do business when you think about carrier selection, supplier selection, strategic network design, thinking forward to the next 3 to 5 years, just in, what you might have to pay, how much more the cost per unit or CPU of that shipment might be when you have to factor in carbon.
And one of the last things to talk through is just, we recently worked with Project 44 as well to put out a sustainability white paper called Scaling Green. It kind of talks through as your supply chain continues to scale and grow, how can you do that in a more responsible manner and include sustainability in there? we talked through some of the topics that we've discussed today just in a lot greater detail. As we post this webinar, we'll make sure to include a link to download this white paper as well. That's all we have for you today. So please reach out for a demo from Project 44 as well as Westernacher. We're happy to show off the supply chain solutions from SAP. We're happy to show off how you can bring in visibility to your supply chain through Project 44, and we're also happy to show off Project 44 sustainability tool.